Hi, this is Brendan McCarthy, editor of the Boston Globe Spotlight team. And thanks for listening to our podcast here on YouTube. If you want to hear more, can't wait for the next episode, or want to just stay up to date on all things Snitch City, consider subscribing to Spotlight Snitch City on your favorite podcast app. Just follow the link in the description below. Stay tuned, because there's a lot more coming.
Before we begin, this story contains strong language and descriptions of violence. Take care when listening.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very well liked, very well known. Like, I could go anywhere in the city, all the different projects, and I was good with all the top dogs in all the places.
This is Frank Simmons, Rizzo to his friends. And in the 90s, he was a big-time drug dealer in New Bedford.
If you read the newspapers, they said I was the kingpin, but I just kind of overseen everything, as a whole, so that way it kept it in line.
Long before it was legal, Frank moved loads of marijuana.
I was more of like a high-end, like I wouldn't go give you a little bag. I was selling 10 pounds, 20 pounds, you know what I mean?
He dealt in more than just pot.
We never kept it all in the same place, of course, and then we'd just distribute it. And then when it was gone, we'd get more.
Were you rich? Did you feel rich?
I was dumb. That's what I was. I always had $3-4 grand in my pocket, but I'd go out and spend $2-3 grand a night at the clubs. Whether it was the drinking clubs or the strip clubs or whatever it was, we spent money.
Funding this lifestyle, staying in business, meant being careful. In New Bedford, where the drug war was being waged daily, the police narcotics unit was aggressive.
You didn't want to run into them. You tried to stay away from them. Like, if we knew they were on the Ave, we'd go to the South End. If we knew they were in the South End, we'd come to the North End. I'd get a call, hey, the knocks are out, full force tonight. They're all over. So all right, let's get out of here. We'd go to Boston. We'd go to Providence. Just stay away from them.
One drug cop, in particular, had his eye on Frank. When's the first time you ever heard the name Paul Oliveira?
92, 93, maybe. Is when he started making a name for himself. And, people knew you had to watch out for him. If he didn't like you, he was on you. Yeah, I stayed away from him.
And on the street, Oliveira had a nickname.
RoboCop. Yeah, everybody knew. If, RoboCop, they knew you were talking about him.
Do you think it was a fitting nickname?
Oh, yeah. He thought he was,
Decades before Paul Oliveira became the city's police chief, he was making a name for himself as one of the most prolific narcotics cops in New Bedford, which put him and Frank on a collision course. It all came to a head one day, late in the summer of 1998.
All right, so my older brother, called me. I want to say it was on Wednesday. And he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, I got a phone call. They're on to you. You better smarten up.
Frank's brother had heard that the cops were keeping tabs on him. Frank's main headquarters, where he kept most of the drugs, was a 3-story walk-up in the city's north end.
So I had actually made arrangements for everything that was in that house to get moved on Saturday.
But it was too late. The police raid the house on Friday.
I pulled in the driveway, put the car in park, and I had a gun to my head. I had the window down about 6 inches, and they were like, don't move. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to move.
Who's there? Is Paul there from the start?
About 10 others. Yeah, there was a shitload of them.
They have a warrant.
They were surprised because they thought they were just coming for weed, and they ended up finding coke and ecstasy. So they were like partying up. They were like happy.
Along with all the drugs, the cops find a lot of cash.
There was $33,000 in the safe. And then they just started passing out money, $1,000 stacks. Just passing them out to everybody.
Sitting there, handcuffed on the couch, Frank says he watches Oliveira doling out wads of his money to the other drug detectives.
Paul was passing out $1,000 stacks to everybody, and then he turns to me and he says, "That's what we call the fucking green fund. Thanks, buddy." That's how that went down.
The Green Fund. According to Frank, police trash his place, seize the drugs, and take his money, even his baseball cards.
I mean, I can't say much at that point. I was just like, keep it, let me go. You know, I knew I was fucked. I knew I was fucked.
The official records from the raid say the drug unit only found about $2,200. But Frank says there was roughly 15 times that, and the cops pocketed the difference. I know it's a big allegation, but I've been able to verify much of what Frank has told me through search warrants, court records, prison paperwork, and more. Frank knows what's coming next.
I was facing a lot of time, you know?
And Paul Oliveira knows this is the perfect time to try and add a new CI to his roster. He's done it many times before.
Did he try to turn you?
Yeah. He tried to turn all of us.
But cooperating with police is a cardinal sin in Frank's world.
Snitch, informant, CI. You didn't want to be labeled a rat, not around here.
Frank's in a tough spot, facing a lot of jail time, and he's got a decision to make. But this won't be the last time he'll find himself in the hot seat. And next time, it's going to be harder to stay true to his code. Because next time, he'll be asked to snitch on Paul Oliveira himself.
They said they'd relocate me, give me money, because that was the concern. Was like, what are you worried about? What am I worried about? I'm gonna rat on a cop? Like, I gotta live around here. Every single cop in the city is gonna be after me.
I'm Dugan Arnett. From the Boston Globe, this is Spotlight, Snitch City. Episode 4, Cops and Robbers.
So is this
This is Station 3 right here.
Oh,
This is Paul's old stomping grounds. This is where they worked out of.
just that little station?
Yep, that's it.
It's a sweltering summer day in New Bedford, and I'm riding shotgun in Frank's SUV.
Who would have worked out of there? Was that drug unit?
Yep, they
Back
were
in the day?
all over there.
Okay.
I first came across Frank's name in a 25-year-old federal court file.
Goes Belleville Ave, North Front, Acushnet Ave.
Frank's in his early 50s. Shaved head, tattoos. He's got a Cheshire Cat grin framed by a goatee and wears a chunky diamond ring on his pinky finger.
And I used to walk by that car lot every day, and the guy one day was like, "Hey kid, you want a job?" And I was like, "Hell yeah." And he's like,
Frank grew up in public housing. His parents split up when he was young. Things were pretty unstable, and he went to live with his grandparents.
they were wicked strict. Like, everybody in the neighborhood's parents were strict. Like, you know what I mean?
Like a lot of people in New Bedford, Frank's grandfather spoke Portuguese at home.
You know, mostly all Portuguese families in this neighborhood. You know, Spanish and Cape Verdeans.
Do you have fond memories of like that time?
I could run back then. I seen headlights. I was gone. Yeah. But I was always afraid to get arrested because my grandfather was in law enforcement, and he always used to tell me, "You get arrested, don't call me. You're staying there." You know.
Growing up, Frank thought he'd follow in his grandfather's footsteps and go into law enforcement himself. He even had a plan.
To go in the Marines, go to Desert Storm, and then come back and, you know, apply for the New Bedford Police Department.
And it might sound crazy, but even well into his career as a dealer, Frank still believed he could do it.
That was going forward until I got in trouble.
The trouble started when Frank graduated high school.
We started drinking every day. We started hanging out. We had a big crew, and it just took off from there.
At the time, drugs coursed through New Bedford. And before long, Frank was deep in the weed business, which meant a lot of attention from police.
We used to follow them, follow us. Like, you know what I mean? We used to drive around behind them and let everybody know where they were.
Frank's other business helped with that.
I had a pager and cell phone store back then. Beepers were pretty popular.
It was called Beeper Shack, and it helped Frank maintain an air of legitimacy. But he knew who his customers were.
One hand went with the other. Back then, you were either a doctor or a lawyer or a drug dealer if you had a pager, you know?
Of course, police knew that too, including Paul Oliveira, RoboCop. In Frank's mind, Oliveira always stood out from the other cops.
Paul was like a pretty boy back then, you know?
What makes you say pretty boy?
Well, you know, he was like always had his hair nice, always had like, you know, I don't know. Just to me, he looked like a pretty boy.
For the record, I'm under no illusions about the kind of guy Frank was back then. He's open about his drug dealing. Yet Frank says he also lived by a code, his own sense of right and wrong. And what bothered him about Oliveira and the other drug cops was that in Frank's eyes, they didn't operate by a code of their own.
We were all just pissed off that they were so crooked and they could get away with it. So we were like, you know, how can we let people know? So somebody came up with the idea, let's make T-shirts and everybody can wear the T-shirts. So that's what we did.
I've seen the shirt. Frank wore it to one of our interviews. It's pretty faded now. On the front, it says 10 questions to ask a New Bedford narcotics detective. And on the back,
That lists the 10 questions. It says, how much money did you pocket in last night's raid? Number 2, if it wasn't for snitches, where would you work? Number 4, when was your last drug test? Now, these all have a story behind them, too. How many innocent people did you set up in the last month? What is your brownie point status with the lieutenant? How many times did you lie in court under oath this month? And number 10, where would you spend your well-paid time if there were no donut or pizza shops? Because they were always there.
Was it hard to find somebody to print those up?
It really was. That was the hard part.
but eventually they did.
And we sold them for $20 a piece. Yeah, we probably sold about 100 of them. I don't know. We thought it was pretty funny. We sent one to the DA. We sent one to the chief at the time. Bunch of guys wore them in court, and the judge flipped out and made them put them inside out. We sent one to him, of course.
To who?
Paul. Yeah. Yeah.
The T-shirts were actually a direct response to what happened on the day of the raid, when Oliveira and the others showed up at Frank's headquarters in the summer of '98, the day Frank learned about the Green Fund. Frank says that after the police tossed his apartment, seized the drugs, and pocketed his money, he and his crew were taken to the New Bedford police station.
And they had a room upstairs for the narcs. It was like a big room like this with all their desks. And they had us all handcuffed to the wall. So I'm literally sitting there like this, handcuffed. They put on the music over the loudspeaker, Another One Bites the Dust. And they were all dancing around. And they had all our cell phones and our pages on a table, like right there in the middle of the room. And every time one of the pages would go off, they'd grab it and they'd go make a call because they were trying to do buys.
Frank says the cops are using their cell phones and pagers to catch people looking to buy drugs. When a call comes in, instead of being answered by a drug dealer, there's a cop on the other end. They set up a fake deal and then go out, and a bust is made.
So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I look, and there's a phone hanging on the wall, like right here next to me. So I'm like, nobody's looking. I grab the phone. There's no dial tone. I hit 9. I get a dial tone.
Frank's got one hand cuffed to the wall, but with his free hand, he calls a guy who works for him at the Beeper Shack.
So I said, go to the store, shut my pager and phone, and shut everybody's stuff off. Because he could go right to my store and go on the computer and shut it off. When I hung up the phone, Paul seen me come over, ripped the phone right out of the wall, fucking threw it. Who did you call? And I'm like, your mother. Yeah. And maybe 10 minutes later, all of our pages and everything stopped. They were so pissed. They were so pissed. And they knew. He knew right there. He's like, that's the phone call you made. Yeah.
And what happens next?
So then they ordered pizza.
For you?
Nope, for them. I'll never forget it. I had $21 in my pocket. That's it. And he took it and ordered pizza with it out of my pocket. And even said, hey, we're ordering pizza with that money. So when the pizza came, I was like, yo, can I get a slice? And he's like, what? And I was like, can I get some cheese?
Can I get some cheese? This might not sound like anything of note, but in this context, asking for a slice of cheese has a very different meaning.
So he come over thinking I was going to rap, because that was the word back then. Hey, can I get some cheese? Meaning I was going to rap. So he says, well, what do you got to tell me?
Oliveira knows what a slice of cheese means too. But Frank's just playing. Jokes aside, in that moment, there was a lot at stake for Frank.
I said, I ain't fucking going nowhere, bro. I got nothing to say to you.
So Frank stays true. But now he's facing a slew of charges.
Possession with intent to distribute, trafficking, possession in a school zone, cultivating. And my charges were added up to 18 to 24 years on the mandatory sentencing.
It's looking really bad for Frank. He's lawyered up and bracing for a fight. He's ready to go down instead of becoming a snitch for Oliveira. But then, he gets a call from another investigator who wants his cooperation. Frank is being offered another chance to snitch. And this time, he considers it. Because this time, it's the FBI calling.
Hi, it's me again, Brendan McCarthy, editor of the Globe Spotlight team. We're halfway through, and there's a lot more coming. And remember, if you want to stay up to date on all the latest, you need to subscribe to Spotlight Snitch City on your favorite podcast app, or follow the link in the description below.
The FBI tells Frank they're building a case against Oliveira and the New Bedford drug unit. And they make it clear that if he works with them, his charges will be reduced, maybe tossed altogether.
Do you remember what they specifically what they offered you?
I wanted to. It was $150,000 cash, and if I wanted to be relocated, they'd relocate me if he got charged, and I testified.
It's a wild stroke of luck for Frank, a winning lottery ticket. And with Frank on board, the FBI tells him their case would be really strong.
You know, they were saying that they already had two reports of this green fund and about Paul being crooked and all that.
In fact, the FBI found out about Frank because they'd already talked to another New Bedford drug dealer, a guy by the name of Arlindo DosSantos. DosSantos wouldn't talk to me, but his story is detailed in federal court records. Here's what happened. In August of 1999, DosSantos is arrested and charged in federal court with drug distribution and money laundering. Federal authorities say he's a key player in a scheme to move thousands of pounds of marijuana through the U.S. mail. But they give him a chance to cooperate by snitching on Paul Oliveira. DosSantos tells investigators that Oliveira and his supervisor in the drug unit, Mel Watton, are notorious in the city. DosSantos calls Oliveira and Watton gangsters and says they're worse criminals than he is, that they're known to pocket cash during drug raids, that they call it their green fund. We reached out to the former head of the drug unit, Mel Watton. He denied all of these allegations. Meanwhile, Chief Paul Oliveira has ignored weeks of interview requests and hasn't directly addressed the questions I've put to him. Despite knowing other dealers were willing to turn on Oliveira, Frank's still not sure what to do. So he seeks out his trusted associates for counsel.
I went down to the fish house and talked to some friends of mine that, you know, to get their advice on what I should do. And one of the presidents of the fish company was like, yeah, rat on him, fuck Paul, put him in jail, he belongs in jail. The other guy who I'm very close with was like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Just do your thing, plead your case, try to do it that way.
Even with the chance to take down a cop he hated, Frank just can't stomach the idea of being a snitch.
I'm not going to rat on somebody to get myself out of trouble. That, to me, that's a broken rule you just don't do.
So Frank doesn't bend. He has his lawyer tell the FBI to shove it.
So then he went back and goes, yeah, my client's not a rat. He don't want to, whatever. So then they started saying, oh, well, if he don't cooperate with us, we're going to look into charging him with the RICO Act, because I had a lot of charges.
But Frank's mind is made up.
Whether it be ratting on the cops or ratting on someone for whatever, that wasn't me.
Frank's out on bail for almost 3 years as his case moves through the court. He keeps his head down, tries to stay out of trouble. The other guys in his crew have already done their time and are back out again.
I didn't want to rat, but I didn't want to do 24 years either. I wanted a plea.
Then one day, he's sitting at the beeper shack and sees a drug cop he knows coming out of the market across the street.
That's when Bob Richards came walking to his car with a bag of meat.
It's none other than Bobby Richard, Paul Oliveira's colleague in the drug unit. The guy who says Paul later got him fired for smoking a cigar.
He wasn't bad. I didn't have much complaints about him. I think he was more of a pawn for Paul than anything. Mm. And then that's when I asked, I said, look, can we talk? I lifted up my shirt, everything, showed him I wasn't wearing a wire. Mm-hmm. I'm talking to you man to man.
Frank says he lays his cards on the table.
I'm letting you know what's going on. Mm-hmm. That they're investigating you guys. They know about you guys being crooked, and they know about the Green Fund, and they know all of that.
He tells Richard, the feds are trying to flip me, and I'm keeping my mouth shut. But there's something I want in return.
I said, listen, buddy, I know how it fucking works. I know how it works. If you guys called the DA and said, hey, listen, we got to give this guy a plea, something came up, blah, blah, blah. They're going to do what you want. That's pretty much how it worked back then.
And it seems to Frank that he was right. It did work that way.
And then, I want to say it was 3 to 5 days later, if that, is when my lawyer called me and said they offered me a plea bargain.
Just like that, a plea bargain. I reached out to Bobby Richard after hearing this story. He told me he remembers running into Frank, but says he doesn't remember anything about the FBI or what led to the plea deal. Regardless of how it happened, Frank feels like he won. The plea bargain means he'll only go to prison for a couple of years. But as he heads to court for sentencing, there's one more surprise in store.
This is at Superior Court in County Street, in New Bedford.
Frank's in a holding cell inside the courthouse when Frank says someone that he doesn't expect to see saunters in. It's Paul Oliveira.
I was like, this guy got a lot of fucking nerve coming back here, And he was like, hey, Simmons, you did the right thing, thank you. And I turned to him and I said, go fuck yourself. Like, don't thank me. I didn't do anything for you, Don't thank me. That was like, I was pissed. He could have said anything else, but not thank you. Because I didn't do anything to keep him out of trouble. But that was his way of saying, dodged a bullet there. Don't thank me, buddy. You can go fuck yourself. That was it. And he was like, oh, yeah? And he left.
I keep thinking about this moment, 25 years ago, inside a courthouse jail cell. Because while Frank's decision not to work with the FBI got him a deal, it also helped clear the way for Paul Oliveira to become New Bedford's police chief. The city issued a statement after the Globe published the story online, saying Paul Oliveira, quote, has no knowledge of a formal request by either the FBI or the Department of Justice in this regard. The FBI's investigation into Oliveira and the drug unit ended without charges. And I talked to someone who I thought might know why.
Why don't you think the feds ultimately did anything about the New Bedford narcotics corruption and Paul Oliveira? Because obviously they were investigating it.
They didn't believe, in my opinion, that all their informants could beat all the cops that would go to the defense of Oliveira. That's just a visceral response.
Barry Wilson is a lawyer who over his career has defended a lot of New Bedford drug dealers. He arranged Frank's plea deal. He was also the guy who told the FBI that his client, Frank, wasn't going to snitch.
And one thing my clients knew was I fought long and hard for them. And it wasn't always clear who was going to jail, me or them.
I interviewed Barry one afternoon in a seafood restaurant in Boston over crab cakes, and for Barry, a few stiff drinks.
Can I get one more Grey Goose on the rocks, please? Yes, absolutely. So,
like Frank, Barry has a no snitching policy.
I had a rule. When you came to see me, one of the first things I'd ever ask you is, listen, at some point they're going to suggest to you that you can cooperate with them, that you could make a deal with them. Now, if that's what you wish to do, I don't have a problem with that, except I'm not your lawyer that can do that. I'm not going to represent you to cooperate against somebody else. It's not what I believe in.
Barry's convictions run pretty deep.
I went to prison myself in 1985. Ironically, Donald Trump and I had something in common. Robert Mueller chased both of us.
Back when Mueller was in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston, he was part of a controversial push by federal prosecutors to force defense attorneys to disclose information about their own clients.
They were giving subpoenas to lawyers all over, and the lawyers were cooperating. I was one of the few that didn't cooperate.
It sounds like something that would be protected by attorney-client privilege, but the court ruled that it wasn't. Still, Barry was convinced that it was wrong, so he defied a court order, was held in contempt, and spent 5 months in prison.
You're obviously, you've got a very strong code, it sounds like. Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from the idea that there are certain rules and regulations, and you know, if you do the crime, then you don't get out of it by talking, ratting somebody out. The mentality of the police can be described as they believe us against them. Thin blue line. I mean, cops used to say this to me all the time. Well, get your client to come in here and cooperate. I said, listen, man, I'm tired of this shit with you characters. You motherfuckers don't rat on each other. If it's not good enough for you, it ain't good enough for my clients. So don't start telling my client what the hell he or she should do. They're not gonna do what you don't do. Now shut the fuck up and leave me alone.
You might be thinking that Barry and Frank's strict code is admirable. But no snitching policies like theirs have consequences. Law enforcement depends on people's cooperation. And when it came to the alleged misconduct in New Bedford's drug unit in the 90s, people's refusal to cooperate hamstrung the FBI.
Jeez. Okay, so just got off the phone. 2-hour conversation with Dave Madigan. He's a former FBI agent down there.
Dave Madigan arrived in the New Bedford area back in the 90s.
And one of the first cases that he gets is when he goes down there is Arlindo DosSantos.
Madigan didn't want his interview to be recorded, but he's fine being on the record. So right after I got off the call, I told my editor what he said.
And he brought Paul Oliveira up before I even did. He was like, you can't trust anybody down there. Everything got back. Everybody knew each other and went to high school with each other.
Madigan had heard about setup cases where cops worked both sides of the drug deal.
You know, we've been hearing time after time after time after time that the FBI was looking into the New Bedford Police Department and Paul Oliveira, and this is the first time that somebody from the FBI says, yes, we were doing that. And that's big.
And Madigan told me that roughly 25 years ago, he and other federal agents were deep into an investigation into the New Bedford narcotics unit. They were developing their own CIs, 2 New Bedford drug dealers, and working on a plan to catch Oliveira and others in the act.
He goes, we were going to set up a fake drug bust at this house in New Bedford and have Mel Watton, Paul Oliveira respond to it. And we're figuring it out what we're going to do.
But just before the FBI was able to pull the trigger on its plan, the dealers suddenly stopped cooperating. Madigan told me, quote, I think Paul Oliveira went and talked to somebody. So this former FBI agent believes Paul Oliveira interfered with a federal investigation. And he's fully on the record about it. I also spoke with another former drug unit officer who didn't want to be identified. And this source told me he believes that the FBI's inability to push forward on Oliveira and the department in the 90s had huge consequences. He said, quote, had they done their job back in the day, this department would be totally different. But what happened later, when the FBI had people almost begging to talk to them? In 2015, former police officer Bobby Richard was contacted by the FBI and says he told them everything. And a few years ago, Officer Mark Raposo called the FBI on his own volition and tried to tell them about how Oliveira knew that a cop in his department named George Santos was stealing drugs under the guise of having information from an informant. He says he didn't even get a call back. I reached out to the FBI for comment. They said, quote, as a matter of longstanding policy, we cannot confirm or deny the existence of investigations.
The idea that he got the chief of police is beyond my understanding.
Where does the accountability for all of this land?
Let's put it this way. To say he didn't have a good reputation as a drug cop is an understatement. Everybody knew way back when. Nobody trusted Oliveira. Anybody you ask would have said, you trust this guy? Fuck no.
And Barry warns me not to trust him either.
You know, I don't get afraid easily, but I would not deal with Paul Oliveira except at arm's length and making sure I crossed every T and dotted the I's. I mean, I believe the man is treacherous. I mean, let me just tell you, you don't go to a meeting by yourself with Paul Oliveira. You make sure you take another person. You make sure you're fucking in public. You don't meet him anywhere. I mean, he's clever. He got to be chief of police.
Indeed, he is the police chief, a public official, someone who's supposed to be accountable to the people of New Bedford.
All right, Westport, Massachusetts, home of Paul Oliveira. It's the 5th day that we've tried to reach out. Haven't heard anything.
That's coming up on Spotlight, Snitch City. Spotlight, Snitch City is reported and hosted by me, Dugan Arnett. Additional reporting by Andrew Ryan and Brendan McCarthy. The podcast is written by Max Green and Kristen Nelson, along with me and Brendan McCarthy. Max Green is senior producer. Executive producers are Spotlight editor Brendan McCarthy and Kristen Nelson, the Globe's head of audio. Additional editing and support from Gordon Russell and Kathleen Goldhar. Nancy Barnes is the Boston Globe's executive editor. Sound design and mix by Stephen Jackson. Episode artwork by Julian D. Paulson. Art direction by Ryan Huddle. Podcast visualization by Olivia Yarvis and Anush Elbakian. Heather Cyrus is the audience editor. Tim Rasmussen is visuals editor. Legal review by John Albano. Fact-checking by Matt Mahoney. Marketing support for this podcast comes from The Podglomerate.